right now I'm just a dude, just hanging out, talking to other dudes and dudettes. No, I'm. Wouldn't that be great?
All the young dudes.
Just
what do they do?
A new Jeff Bridges type. I'm just looking for a rug. Like, that's all.
I've got a robe that's just for that because I'm a minister of that church.
Yeah,
the dude church. Not even bullshit.
That's awesome. Like
we have it laminated.
Let's get our white Russians here. No, I did ask for a white Russian at a faculty open bar once, and it just baffled everybody that they didn't know what I was talking about. And it was during that era in which the movie was out, and it was
that's not a widely unpopular drink, I feel like.
Yeah, and it was a pretty popular movie too, but I was just like, this is the wrong crowd. I'm apparently casting my pearls before swine. Anyway, yeah, so I'm a professor of history at St. Bonaventure University, and I have a lot of different interests, but most of my interests tend to be world and East Asian history, and there's something going on there, isn't there? Get closer. Does that work?
Project a little bit.
Project.
Yeah.
Oh,
yeah. Don't be afraid to speak your truth to power.
Yeah.
It's not about fear. It's just about
It's about microphone etiquette.
Willingness. So I teach history classes mostly, and a lot of those have to do with East Asia because I spent a lot of time in China and Taiwan, and on top of that, there's sort of a deep connection with history, and my dad was a social studies teacher, and my grandfather was this professor of literature, and my mom is actually a professional genealogist, so a lot of these things just sort of settled onto me and, became a little bit of who I am. Make sense?
Mm-hmm.
What made you go to China and Taiwan for a long time?
Well, my older brother, who's 10 years older than I am, and I really looked up to him. He was a cool guy, and in the 80s, he had a friend who ended up going to Japan because his parents were part of some Air Force thing, and he went over there and taught English, and he really enjoyed it, and he would send back all sorts of cool things and write cool letters, and this was in the 80s, and so ninjas and giant robots were all the rage, and
Gigantor,
and you throw in a little Mr. Miyagi there, and the Karate Kid. Before we just have Japan fever in the 80s, and I was like, that is so cool. That's what I want to do. And so I graduated high school, just barely, actually. I made it.
Cross the finish line.
Yeah.
But I was like, okay, I'm ready to go to Japan now and do the same thing. And, of course, it just wasn't that easy, and it didn't work out. And so I ended up going to Taiwan instead, which I was like, I don't know where that's at, but it's an island close to Japan, so it's got to be kind of cool. And ended up going there and spending a little time there, and came back to the States having learned some Chinese, and I ended up going to college then, and I just kind of got forced into a number of courses that were Chinese literature, Chinese language, Chinese history, and the professors were really just so stoked that I could actually speak the language and read it and stuff like that. And they're like, this is a true gift. And I was like, yeah, whatever. It's just the thing I do. And, I just picked it up, and so I ended up changing my trajectory, I guess, and doing that. It tended to work, just studying Chinese and translating things, and doing some of the history, and went up through grad school and got jobs, and ended up staying in China for, a number of years, doing research, working, and that kind of thing. So it was good, and so that's kind of how it started.
Oh, sorry. I just, out of curiosity, did you ever think about staying or going back?
Oh yeah, I mean, every time I was there for like a long period of time, I was just like, I'm never going back to the States. This is the place. You know? And it was just, it was a great time because there was a lot of opportunity, and then things were different back in the '90s and 2000s there, and it was really nice, and but every once in a while, and you're like, okay, I have to go back now. There's no sort of path forward to stay at this point, and usually that presents itself very suddenly, like, okay, I'm not getting paid for anything anymore. I can't find a job. I've been living on people's couches, and now I guess I just have to take advantage of this plane ticket that I have that's open to get back to the States and regroup. So sometimes it was just a sort of natural thing. Sometimes it was planned, but I miss it. It's a big part of who I am, I think, but I don't really think about it unless I'm there most of the time, Occasionally I'll run into somebody and we'll start speaking Chinese, and it like kind of comes back, and so it's pretty interesting. I'm like, oh man, I'm such a different person when I'm doing that thing. Yeah.
So how did you find yourself here?
Olean?
Yeah.
Beautiful Olean.
A job.
Okay.
St. Bonaventure. Yeah. Before this, I was in Richmond. I taught at Virginia Commonwealth and some other place called Hampton Sydney, which is like, some crazy college that's way out in the middle of nowhere in Virginia. And then before that, I was in Washington State and Idaho and, Green Bay, Wisconsin. I had to do the rounds basically before I could get like, an actual sort of, permanent job. So Bonaventure just happened to be that permanent job.
Awesome. So is this in your mind, is this one of those respites where you're just kind of building up capital before going back again?
No, I don't know.
Okay. There's nothing wrong with just leaving.
I mean, it's been hard to get back. I mean, the last time I was there was probably 10 years ago now, and
just the landscape there significantly changed from the last time you went.
Yeah, it always does. It's it's crazy. Things just grow and build, and more people, and it gets pretty wild, and it gets more expensive to travel there, and time gets more precious, and you have to work or do this or do that, and so I don't know. At some point, I'm sure I'll make a trip back when I find the occasion. Maybe I'll retire there. Just find some bungalow in Vietnam and
a nice patty somewhere.
Chill out. Yeah.
Was there a specific place that stands out in your mind as your favorite?
Yeah, I kind of attached to this part of China that's like right on the border of Vietnam and Tibet. It's like southwest China. It's right there in like the Tibetan like plateau foothills. It's really nice. Yeah, it's kind of slows down, and a lot of different ethnicities. I mean, people think of China as just there's a bunch of Chinese people, but the truth is there's like 55 different minority classes there, and so you get to one of those places and they're not speaking Chinese, they're speaking their own language, and they have their own culture, and they're different people. So
lots of little insular almost communities and dialects and
exactly, especially when you get, like I said, to sort of the Tibetan plateau, the Himalayas. It's just there's so many mountains and people get isolated, and it's you get to sort of explore and meet new people, and there's some very weird things that happen, and there's this place one time I went to, it's called Lake Moso, and it was out there. It was probably, I was already out there a ways in this little town, and 8 hours by bus. and then you take another bus that's like a 12-hour bus ride to this lake that's, you know, in the Himalayas. And these people that live there, the reason I went is because they were kind of famous back then for being they're called the Moso people, and they're matriarchal, you know, women kind of lead the charge, and they own the houses and all the stuff that goes with that. And they had this thing that was called a walking marriage, which, like, basically the men, you know, if they like, or, you know, if one of the women liked them, they, you know, they're like sort of, you know, I guess, well, like common law married, not actually married. And they stay with the woman for a while, and she gets sick of them, or they get sick of her, and, you know, she kicks them out, and then they go back home to their mom, right? And that's sort of like the culture, and so it's, you know, it's a little bit free and loose. I mean, in terms of like their sexuality, which is kind of different for East Asia, because a lot of it's very conservative, and, you know, you don't have people thinking about dating or marriage until they're like well into their 30s, and yeah, and so they had this festival, and it was kind of cool. You know, it was a big festival during this time of year. It's like a harvest festival, and they have like this big square, and everybody's dancing. There's a bonfire, and I just remember this this woman who came up to me, this girl, and she's like, "Hey, I like dancing with you," and I'm Moso, like that's their name, like, and that was basically the proposition. She's like, you know, I'm Moso, like, let's get together. And I'm like, yeah, that's cool, you know. I'm like, at the time I was married, and I was, you know, still am married, and, you know, I was just like, at the time I was like, you know, yeah, no, this yeah, I'm good, you know. They have all sorts of crazy traditions, and like, so there was a
no moso.
Yeah, no moso. Yeah. It's like, I'll dance, you know, with your bonfire, but, like, you know, that's as far as it goes. But I got kind of crazy. I had a friend who was with me, and she had like kind of been dancing there too, and some of the moso guys were like, yeah, she's cool. And we were staying at this hotel, and they had like these transom windows over the doors, and like in the middle of the night, one of these guys just started crawling in her window, and she was freaking out, and, you know, and all it took was her to freak out, and he was like, okay, I guess this isn't, like, you know, cool, I'm leaving, you know. And I was like, you know, I guess you could have knocked her, like, you know,
Yeah.
something, and, you know, so it was always
Skipped a few steps there.
sort of wild times, you know, lots of crazy things that happen, and you know, and so it's kind of a cool place in the world where, you know, you're sort of you are a foreigner, you know, you're a sort of alien, sort of in this landscape that is alien to you. So it's I don't know, unique.
And how does that all tie into identity politics?
I don't know.
Yeah. Did the trip breed your interest in going into history, or was the stuff from your childhood kind of already leading you that way anyway?
I mean, it was kind of like, you know, people had already decided this was the thing I was going to do, you know.
Yeah.
Like, you know, you go to college, and people are like, you should do this, you should do that, and I just, you know, blindly listened and followed. Like, when I started college, I was a pottery and sculpture major. Like, that's where my mind was. I was like, hey, it's cool to, like, hang out in the studio and just make things with your hands. And, you know, eventually, like, people are like, well, you're going to need a job someday, and, you know, you're pretty good at this thing. Maybe this could work for you. And you're like, yeah, I guess I should listen to somebody who actually is already there and knows what they're doing. So, yeah. So, yeah, that's kind of
Okay.
And then as you go along, you just gather.
And then coming across that cultural melting pot, we'll call it, was just a bonus for somebody who already had the interest.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's a journey. It's not.
Yeah.
I'm not going anywhere. Like, you know, it's just I don't have a destination in mind. I'm you know, I'm along for the ride. Does that make sense? I don't know. You know, so
A true member.
yeah. So, and, you know, like I said, identity politics, you know, that's just one thing I picked up along the way. And, you know, you pick up a lot of things along the way. You just think, okay, let me collect this thing. Let me explore this thing. Let me be a part of this. And, yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I don't know. Make sense?
Yeah.
more or less.
More or less.
You're just riding those waves, man. Just
Yeah.
existing.
I am from Florida. Yeah, I grew up with skateboarding and surfing. So like, yeah, I'm just rolling. You know, just
So, since we're talking about ancestral heritage and what that means for us,
What does it mean to be Florida man?
yeah, what does it mean to be what does it mean to be Florida man? And beyond that, what does it mean with so much academia in your family? Like, did they also travel a lot? Did they also have that wandering mentality?
yeah, it's kind of strange because you know you grow up around people and then sometimes you don't know what they've done or you don't bother to ask them and things like that and then they just come out occasionally and I wasn't the only one. Like my older brother sort of wasn't the one who started it, but he was the one who started it for me. And then after that, my younger brother and my younger sister and everybody's just moving all over the world and doing different things. So it's like we couldn't stay home, right? And so like my younger brother ended up in New Zealand for a decade, and my sister went to Albania. Like, I don't even know why would you go to Albania? Like, I didn't even know that was a place you could go to. I'm like, here it is, and spending, decades away from home in Florida. And you talk about things and, occasionally you're like, yeah, my brother's in Australia, and my dad's like, oh yeah, I went to Australia once. And I was like, when? Like, when were you in Australia? You're like, you never leave the couch, right? Like, you're like, oh no, I guess this is part of like a tradition that people go places and do things, and and that maybe that's part of it too. But yeah, this whole concept of I think identity politics is when I talk about it, and it's one of my specialties, I guess, at the university. I teach classes on this, and it's more about like trying to sort of understand your connections to the world around you, to the people around you, to the things that sort of tether you and sort of moor you to who you think you are, right? And that's kind of what it is. I mean, the more you find out about different people and your place in this world, the more you have a sense of who you are, and then strangely you lose a sense of who you are at the same time.
Yeah.
So, like, that juxtaposition, how would you explain that? Like, some specific ways maybe that people gain or lose their sense of self in this process?
Yeah, and I mean, it's we go through periods of growth and change and it kind of revolves around like ancestry to some degree, because you kind of take cues from people who came from from your past or from before you, and if you're from like the South, that there's like this already sort of this built-in like heritage type of mentality, and you have to know who your people are, and and that was a really big thing growing up, that we had all these sort of like references to this person fought in the Civil War, and this person fought in the Revolutionary War, and this person came over on the Mayflower, and and then there was like these people were back in England, and these people were in Germany, and you're related to this person, that person, and it gets kind of crazy to some degree, because you're kind of looking at all these different people that you're related to, and some of them famous and some of them not, and you're just like, and who am I? That's, I think, one of the things that you kind of run into with these questions, and increasing, like in the discipline, when we start to sort of analyze it and critique it and things like that. We're constantly dealing with this sort of contradiction that, okay, I'm a unique person, I'm important, right? I matter. And increasingly you find other people who are unique people and they're important and they matter. And before you know it, like, okay, if everybody is important and matters and they're unique, then how am I actually special at all, right? If you're ever like in a big crowd of people, a very large crowd of people, and that's probably some of my, experiences in Asia too. It's a very populous place. You're just like, there's so many people doing so many different things, and where do I fit in, right? Like how do you even fathom the intricacies of everybody doing different things? It's like we're ants, to some degree. And so I think that's, it's big questions, big thoughts, right? Painting with a big brush. And so I think, when we get to identity politics, it starts to sort of be the sort of idea of, what are the things that make me, where are those sort of things built, and what happens when one of those things, slips away or becomes untrue? Like, what happens when you figure out Santa Claus isn't real? I know.
He was just there to sell me Coca-Cola?
Yeah.
He just sold me Coke. Jeez.
Yeah, I know, right?
A very different Santa.
Jeez.
And this is one of the things that they actually do talk about quite a lot in identity politics, is this example of Santa Claus, right? Because this is this person who is generous and, loving to everyone, and he comes and he gives you presents, and then then you find out he's not a real person, and your parents have been giving you presents, and they've been lying about his existence, and you feel very sort of betrayed because your parents have been lying to you, and you realize there's some sort of large conspiracy at work that you weren't clued in on. And then there's sort of the idea, okay, well, wait a minute, but these are my parents, and they have been giving me gifts, right? So I should take that into account too, that that they're they love me enough to lie to me. That's a sort of a weird contradiction. You're okay, that's and how do you deal with big shakeups in life? And that's good for university students. It's good for everybody, but it works out in terms of classes, because you don't realize that you have a lot of things ahead of you that you're going to kind of lose and feel betrayed about, and so it's good to have some sort of sense of okay, what do I do then, right? The end of the world, when people sort of run into deaths in the family or big breakups and that sort of thing, whatever the context may be, what do you do after that, right? How do you piece things back together, right? You just have to go get a tattoo and go to Aruba or something and
Cut your hair. Yeah.
Go to a rave and,
fake your death, a new name.
Yeah, I mean, it's
China.
yeah, we exactly, right?
Plenty of options.
Yeah.
Are there any case studies that you with students that stay in your mind when you tell them about this? Anything that happened?
Well, I mean, when I do it in a class, we've actually gone to the point where we're okay, let's get your genealogy going here, do your DNA and join Ancestry, and we're going to study this over the next 4 months and sort of see how you're connected, and so them finding out sort of things about their past that they didn't know about, or maybe that their parents didn't even know about, or finding out that they're related to each other. We have one of these classes, there was only 4 kids in it, and 2 of them were whoa, we're related, we're fourth cousins, right? And we share this ancestor who was in the Plymouth colony, and I was and they're whoa, what are the chances? And I'm you're both sitting in the same classroom in Western New York, right? You're both white, you both have similar European last names. I'm figuring the chances are pretty good. Let's run the statistics on this, and you're going to see that you're in the majority. And so
what you were telling me something about how people want to be related to Vikings and have Norse heritage.
Okay, yeah. So when we think about
that's bitching, dude.
Yeah, it is. I mean, when we think about heritage, and this is always, a very American thing to do because we lack a sense of identity, especially culturally, compared to, other countries that have more monolithic sort of concepts of heritage, and ethnicity is, tends to be sort of.
I've heard we've had the best culture.
Homogenous. Well, I mean, I don't mind it. It's pretty good. I like it. I get along.
It's a smorgasbord, kind of.
Why
It's
not?
the garbage plate from Rochester.
Exactly. If you don't like it, you just eat around it, right?
You don't need to eat the mac salad. You can pick around it.
Yeah, exactly.
Nobody judges you for not eating the gravy. No.
No, yeah. So I mean, I don't remember what I was saying. What was I talking about?
Yeah,
How cool Vikings are.
I'm just thinking about eating garbage plates.
I know.
Yeah, like the garbage plate. It's like a Homer Simpson moment. So like we don't have like a great sense of like cultural sort of belonging, and this is because we're all transplants to a great degree, and this is a particular problem with people who have European heritage who basically are white people, and like and so people will gravitate towards things that they sort of tend to sort of stereotype as like, this is my heritage, right? And like, if you watch any of these like Ancestry.com commercials, it's always like a guy like dancing around in lederhosen and drinking beer and eating pretzels, and you're like, okay, German heritage, right? And like all of a sudden he's like, and then I took a DNA test and I figured out that I'm not German at all, like I'm Scottish, and then all of a sudden he's like wearing a kilt and like
He's still drinking beer.
Still drinking beer and eating haggis or something. I'm like, it's like, like it, and it kind of gives you a sense of like, okay, yeah, we're sort of easily sort of, persuaded to sort of belong to something because we don't have a whole lot of sense of belonging that we brought with us. We've undergone so much change and in the last few hundred years, and so inevitably people, whenever they do their heritage, they first want to be related to somebody who is of royal lineage, right? We all want to be,
We was Kangs.
Yeah, we want to be in charge, right? Like I want to be special. I want to be in charge, right? I'm related to such and such king or such and such royalty.
It's somebody else's fault down the chain that I don't have the castle.
Yeah, exactly. And then there's like, and people like spend tens of thousands of dollars. Like, I'm going back to my homeland in Europe, and they'll go to Ireland and they'll visit some castle and brag to the locals in the pub that like exactly like this is where I belong, right? And like, I'm sure the people there are like, well, we appreciate the tourism, but like, yeah, you don't know what it is to be us, and you don't really belong here. So you're welcome for a week. Take a tour around the castle.
Learn how to speak the language next time.
Yeah, exactly. Right. And so everybody wants to be related to royalty. And then, of course, beyond that, it tends to be Native Americans, sort of connections too. And I mean, that's kind of a little bit more practical, I think, because there is quite a lot of, sort of history there for settlers sort of moving in and out of like territories that belong to Native Americans, and interactions and intermarriages and so on and so forth. And so that's a thing too. And people will, get pretty crazy about that. And, my wife has this uncle who like, swears that there is some sort of Native American heritage that he has. And he just went whole hog into it. He, started growing his hair long, and braiding it and wearing the garb, and he was making flutes and stuff like that. And, he was just, you're just kind of like, yeah, well, this is kind of nutty because you just look like a white dude to me, and like, there's not a lot of proof there. And eventually somebody takes a DNA test and there's no proof at all of that. Right. And so that's one of the other ones. And then the other big one is the Vikings, right? Like, since we are European, from European heritage, mostly speaking, about white people in America, right? We want to be related to somebody cool, and that happens to be the Vikings. Like, am I related to Vikings, right? Like, and this is sort of the easy part of it, because there are like geneticists and people who have done the genealogy, and if you get back to like medieval Europe, like the population there is not so large, right? We're dealing with a fairly small population of people, you know, in the tens of millions, you know, at its sort of greatest point, right? And you know, you think about that, and you're like, well, you know, that's a lot of people, but it's actually not a lot of people for a whole sort of subcontinent like Europe, and so that's the good news that, you know, chances are, if you know, statistically, if you're white and you live in this day and age, you are related to the Vikings, right? Like there's, you know, just almost a, you know, statistical certainty of it, right? Does it show up in DNA? Like, well, you know, yeah, a little bit here and there, but like, you know, it's just kind of a hodgepodge, and you know that DNA kind of washes out after a while. So, you know, you get to things like that, and so we've done a lot of like, you know, not only DNA sort of genetic sort of studies within our own family, my mom and me and my brother, and so on and so forth. And we got in on this early when you had to like take DNA tests that, you know, required you to draw blood as opposed to like spit in a tube or whatever. And, you know, the names started to pop up. You start to see connections, right? And the paperwork's there, the DNA is there, things match up, and you're like, okay, here it is. Like, I'm related to a Native American, or I'm related to this very important person who is royalty, or I'm related to, you know, Jesse James, or, you know, whatever. Like, and, you know, these are all like, you know, actual things. And so like, there's like this thing in my genealogy where Pocahontas is my 12th great grandmother. Like, and people are like, oh, great, that's awesome. And you have like these claims to fame. But at the same time, I'm like, you know, when that kind of shows up, even in your genetics, right? It's like, you know, a drop of water in the ocean, right? Like, and then on top of that, you kind of like wonder, okay, like, what does that mean if I'm, you know, if I'm related to this person or that person? And then you get into the whole ball of wax where like, okay, I'm related to all these cool, you know, people that are famous.
And I work at Burger King.
Yeah, that's part of it. That's a part of it too. Yeah. But then you're also like, you know, you don't stop to think until it comes along and kind of smacks you in the face. Like, how many people are you related to that were just like actually terrible human beings who owned slaves or
Genghis Khan?
Who like, you know, went on these massive conquests and subjugated people, or, you know, how many murderers are we sort of related to, or, you know.
Well, that's the best part. I want to be related to the murderers.
Exactly. Like, those are cool stories. And, you know, so there's sort of this conflict where you're like, okay, you know, when people do this generally, and they're trying to sort of like find some sense of culture, some sense of identity, they start to look at themselves and like identify with like, you know, these shining examples of humanity, but, you know, sort of put away the, you know, those people that you don't want to talk about, and, you know, they just kind of get sort of lost in the sort of, I guess, in the math, I guess. I don't know. Yeah, when you're adding yourself up. And so the thing is, you know, you're like, okay, realistically, you know, I'm not the only one related to these people, that there's like, you know, tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who probably have the same relationships, who are
to the same, like, really extraneous degree.
Yeah.
It's really far off. And
and
doesn't
then
really matter.
And then the point is like, okay, even if I have like some sort of like claim to sort of being related to somebody like Pocahontas, like, how Native American does that make me? Like, none. I wasn't raised in that culture. I have no clue. Like, I mean, their people don't even exist anymore, right? Like, you know, like my connection to it is like the Disney movie. Like, okay, I know about John Smith and like, yeah, exactly. Like, she's talking with raccoons and like, you know, stuff like that. And you're like, okay, cool. Yeah. You know, this is,
I guess, in an abstract way, we're just kind of like living genetic memory banks for our ancestors in that respect. Like, at least there's evidence, like, hey, somewhere maybe some cool aliens will be like, wow, they had some cool ancestors, but these guys,
They really lost it along the way. Like,
some in the 21st century. Fuck.
I mean, yeah, and
It was
that's
probably the lead.
yeah. I mean, it's interesting because also you get into that kind of point of it, like where we're talking about like not history or like culture. You know, we're talking about like, you know, science, you know, natural science, and the fact that like, what is the purpose of DNA and genetics, and basically it's like, okay, like survival of the species, right? And the more you learn about that, like the more you learn that like, okay, this is a really sort of tough battle that is being fought here for survival of the species, and you know, while we think, you know, okay, all these people are intermarrying and they're, you know, the good parts of their DNA are coming together to form better human beings who are better adapted to their environment and so on and so forth. You know, that's only part of the story or part of the truth. And the other part is like, you know, that's the minority, and then the grand majority of us are like, you know, just, you know, kind of messed up, you know, like we've just inherited like, you know, leftover bits from so many different people. And, you know, our genetics are still trying to make sense of it in a lot of ways. Like, you know, we move around so much, and we you know, we become less and less adapted to sort of survive as a species, right? And so there's that kind of grim sort of thing that you put on top of it. Like, okay, like we all want to belong, we all want to be cool, you know, but we have all this sort of history that, you know, that's kind of shameful, and, you know, we all want to sort of keep our, you know, progeny alive, you know, have kids, and, you know, continue the species, and look how beautiful my kids are and how gifted they are, and, you know, and let's take family photos, and, you know,
we're not related to Pol Pot.
Yeah, and like we're celebrating this, but at the same time, like, you know, here's the grim truth: is like, okay, you know, the you know, nature's still doing its work, right? That like, you know, people are still getting cancer and diseases, and you know, adaptations are not working to some degree, and we've even sort of driven this sort of you know,
maladaptive of it.
We've driven ourselves to sort of this end where it starts to look very grim, where we're like, okay, what have we done to ourselves? Like, you know, like and usually that sort of alienation comes from like, okay, yeah, like it used to be so grand, and now I'm working at Burger King, you know, or, you know, I'm struggling to make ends meet, or, you know, whatever. Right. And so when you get into the sort of this politics part of identity, things start to sort of make sense, especially in, you know, current day politics where you're like talking about, okay, there's a lot of people who feel like they're being left behind.
I mean, how many people are stuck in this system, feel like they're going nowhere, and would just kill to feel like I have some cool connection to anything grander than this. The grand sum of all the efforts of me getting to this point in life shouldn't be that I work at Dresser fucking Rand till I die. You know,
yeah.
So please, George Washington somewhere, please be my grandpa.
Yeah,
you know?
Exactly. Right. Like, you know, and yeah. And so that's, I mean, that's, I think, a big part of it. Like we all just want to like feel like we belong and connect, and, you know, and matter. And, you know, I like to sort of like, you know, dispel that myth to some degree. Like, you know, like there's kind of some beauty in the fact that like, okay, you know, I'm just a rando.
It's all pointless anyways.
I'm doing random things, like trying to make sense of it all. Like there's some poetry and beauty in sort of the like the attempt that we're all sort of given, you know. So like, you know, like, okay, things don't always line up, right? And, you know, and bad things happen, you know, and you know, that's sort of the nature of it, right? And like you get into that, and like it gets pretty grim, but you know, it's interesting topics to sort of, you know, put somebody into that sort of state of mind, especially when they're like 20 years old, and like, you know, they think everything's like right there waiting for them, and there's like a lot of privilege in their lives, and you know, that's yeah. So it's like, you know, hey, you know, the point of life is death, actually. And
Thank you.
Yeah.
like, you want to know the meaning of life? Here it is, like, to die. Like, you live, therefore you die. Like, and that's kind of sad, but at the same time, it's it's a very consoling thought to sort of like be given, right out the gate, like, okay, maybe cherish the time you have, do something that you can sort of, feel good about, and
It's all going to end someday. Enjoy it while it
and like,
lasts.
do you really want to be related to Thomas Jefferson, who, was having sex with his slaves, and, and, things like that. Like, maybe the people who came before us, even though they seem great, probably weren't as great as they seem. If you're related to royalty, well, great. Those people were living in these cold, dingy castles, and, using chamber pots and dumping their, feces in the street. And
the king had a guy who did that.
And
for him,
yeah,
to be
exactly. If you're
That's what made him a king.
That's what made him a king. Now, if you were related to the guy who held the chamber pot, maybe not quite as auspicious.
Yeah.
But still pretty good. Still pretty good lineage.
yeah, but I mean, and then, but then you can drink some like some sort of ale and get some gout, and die at the age of
45.
40. Yeah, I was gonna say 42 because
I was being a little generous.
42. The meaning of life, the universe, and everything. Right?
So how do students react with this absurdist view on life, or even optimistic nihilism, depending on how you take it?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good word for it, optimistic. Yeah, no, I mean, I think some get it, and they're like, okay, yeah, this is the contradiction we're dealt with, but like, this is just a class too, and this is just some crazy professor who's just, has too much time to think about these things and has read too much, and, like, what are we going to have for dinner, and like, where are we going this Friday to like, drink and things like that, or,
$2 beers tonight at the Hickey Tav.
Yeah, I mean,
exactly,
the absurdity of everything you've talked about being this grand introspective moment for students, and then at the end of the day, them just leaving class and thinking about what to get next for food, which is very pragmatic too. I think it's just so funny.
But it's also
that's something you get to experience.
Our ancestors were doing all day too.
Exactly, but this is the poetics of it. I think this is the this is the how sublime it is that like here we've faced this stark reality, and we're going to do exactly what we're supposed to do and like ignore it and just go live. Like there's something to that as well, which I'm like, okay, that's fine.
It doesn't have to be this all-consuming thing.
No,
it just can be what it is.
And it's just, like I always get to the point where it's like, it's just good to be aware of these things. Like you don't have to like, live by them or think about them ever again. But, at least you've like run into the occasion where I'm like, okay, I know this is part of the equation. Right. So
what do you feel about eugenics?
Oh yeah, well that happens.
CRISPR. Let's get the CRISPR babies out.
I mean, there was like I sensed maybe not intentional, but a subtle argument almost for it, and saying that we are breeding ourselves.
Me? I didn't argue for it.
I love eugenics.
It's great, isn't it?
I wish they would hook me up to the Chinese milking machines and get all the diabetes out of my DNA.
So when you're talking,
we are doing stem cell research out there.
I know like they cure diabetes, or at least they're pretty damn close.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on it in relation to everything?
Well, I mean, I don't think that like. I wouldn't define what I was talking about as eugenics necessarily so much as it's just natural process of organisms on this planet that we adapt or we die, right? Mm-hmm. And I think that to some degree, like we've kind of put ourselves in a position where we're becoming less adapted. Like, I mean, look at the world around you, and just in the last 50 years, we're dealing with, unparalleled technology, right? And you have to also sometimes question, were we meant to live like this? Like, and I think a lot of people feel that underneath. Like, were we meant to feel like what we feel like, and there is a lot of alienation to it, right? Like, and you see what it does to the world. And I don't mean to be like, like somebody who's like trying to, say, this is bad or it doesn't belong, but it's just, you have to think about it, be aware of like, okay, there are things happening now that like, that are really spinning out of our control, like as if we had any before. But now, like, we get to know things immediately as they happen. Yeah. And not just us, everybody. And so, when you deliver like news to people, like they react, right? And so like we've sped up the reaction, that the reaction time is like immediate and it's constant. And, is it any wonder that people are like, okay, like, I'm depressed. I'm like anxious. I need therapy. I need pills. I need this. I need that. Right. Like, is it any wonder that this is part of it? Like, and I'm not saying that like what has happened to the world is a bad thing. I'm just saying that like, this is us adapting.
Yeah. I mean,
and is it the actual adaptation that we need, or is it going to sort of end in some sort of like some sort of unfortunate series of events? I guess Yeah. And again, I'm just like
who the fuck knows?
Be aware, right? Like and then don't care about it, I guess, afterwards. Like.
Be aware, but not beholden to it.
Yeah.
Don't let I don't know, but what do you think? I mean, what do you think? Like, there's, we're saying this in the middle of a podcast, and do you ever feel like that there's like, that we're sort of pushing towards some sort of like
only thing we'll need
dangerous cliff.
Only thing we'll need to be scared of is when all the Chinese super soldiers that look like me come scrambling across the cliffs.
Yep. All the CRISPRs.
All the CRISPRs, yeah.
CRISPR
There's our case for eugenics.
The
right?
There it is right now. If it's the future you want, and it's not a good one, I promise you that.
Yeah.
It to me, it feels like we're seeing, our history kind of just continue to repeat itself, that we build these new structures, these new systems of operation. Right now, our current one is this capitalist, republic that we have here. But fundamentally, at the end of the day, globally, our main problem seems to be that those who manage to like hoard control of most of the resources are pretty much dictating the fate of all the rest of us survivors limiting the degree in which we can fix these issues and adapt to them. So like you said, we have the internet now, and it's easier to be informed than ever before. I can see what's happening in Palestine right now if I wanted to. But my ability to do anything other than donate to aid organizations is so limited because of, again, the system that we've built here, at least over the last 200 years globally, forever, I guess.
Yeah.
We're awful creatures, aren't we?
I mean, yeah. I mean, it's like, and we get this sort of, byline in movies and novels that, like, we're the only species that, tends to do this, that like everything else lives in harmony with nature, which I don't think that's exactly true, but,
I mean, the way animals eat each other is pretty fucked up.
I know, right? Like, they're doing some messed up things. I've seen those bully dolphins, like, like I know what this is the animal kingdom, but like, but there is this argument like, okay, what have we done to ourselves? And, like, well, did I do it? Or am I just complicit in it? Right. Like, I don't know.
Or am I just a byproduct of it?
Yeah, exactly. So.
Well, I mean, I like what you were talking about, how it's kind of mixing what Noah was said. In this world that's more capital focus, it's always exponential growth and that next thing and that next stage. And we've done it so much that, much like you were talking about before, I think we're starting to hit points where we are designing things that outdo ourselves and our own capabilities.
Yeah.
and we're doing it at such a rate that we don't have the time or the experience to know when we should back off.
Yeah.
Well, that's why
And-
we can't believe like the pyramids can exist, because we can't imagine a bunch of fucking ignoramus stonemasons who don't know anything but work in stone spending hours and hours and hours over years and years and years and thousands of years cutting these fucking stones, because we've got tools that just make that shit.
They use psychic powers.
That's right.
This is the aliens, right? Everybody has like a History Channel out there.
That was on the History Channel. It's got to be true.
I mean, haven't you? What was the movie? Right, the Stargate, right? Like that. Was,
Stargate.
Yeah. We all know that was true.
That was 100% accurate.
It was like them telling the future.
prophetic.
It was prophetic.
Yeah, like, yeah. We gotta pay attention to.
Guess we got to go out to Mount Rushmore then. See, check in on their base.
Yeah, find the national treasure while we're at it.
Yeah, go steal the Declaration of Independence.
It's under. Yeah, why not? Like, that's,
Who's going to stop us? The government?
I know. What,
They're not real, right?
Unjust laws made to be opposed.
This might be like something you might probably not even remember, but it's totally a biased question too. But if you can, which one of your students who's gone through this DNA testing has come out with the coolest ancestor?
So there was I think I was telling you about this one, and he's a local kid, and I'm not gonna
Don't name him. You don't
out
have to
him
do that.
like it's like he's
I want his full name. I want his full address.
he's related to
Social
politicians and stuff like that. Like, so he has a prominent family, like in Western New York, and but he went into his genealogy and he found that he had this ancestor, like a great grandfather, who was like a whale boat captain, right? And like was out in New England and out there.
It's his fault.
Doing killing the whales and bringing them back, and making corsets and lamp oil and stuff, and that was a big thing, and but that wasn't the coolest part. He said that like his uncle or his great grandfather or whatever, who was like the captain of the ship, like was going out and getting these whales, had one time brought this very sort of enthusiastic young man onto the crew who wanted to like document all of this stuff that was going on with the whaling, and it was so exciting at the time. And later on, like this young man goes on to write a novel, and the captain in the novel, we're talking about Moby Dick, of course,
yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Like,
No
and
way.
Captain in the novel, Captain Ahab, is kind of modeled after this captain that was his great grandfather.
That is really cool.
Like it's like
That's
kind of
really
it was like the evidence was there. Like he not only did like the sort of family history and like genealogy and stuff, but he also went and did like the research for it too. And he was like, and here's this passage, and it relates to this passage, which he took in like a notebook on the boat and stuff like that.
Awesome.
I mean, like the whole thing about the white whale, of course, is like a whole another sort of aspect of the story. But like, yeah, you're like, oh man, that's crazy. Like,
That's very specific.
yeah,
too.
like you're like that's cool. That's cool things to
about-
sort of know. I'm like,
I'm literally related to a character.
yeah, like your great grandfather was Captain Ahab, man. Like he couldn't let it go.
He couldn't let it go.
It's like let it go, man. Like you don't need revenge. Like, yeah. So yeah, I thought that was a pretty cool story, and I don't know. There's a few others here or there, but some of them sort of tend to sort of yeah. Actually, the other day in class, this was so weird too. There were these two kids in class. They kind of sit across the row from each other, and this is the beginning before we start class, and this kid says, hey, are you such and such? And he's like, yeah, that's me. He's like, hey, we're fourth cousins. He's like, what? He's like, yeah, my uncle was doing some like genealogy and stuff, and like your name came up, and I was like, I think that kid's in my class. And like he's like, sure enough, like it was your family and it's you. And like this kid in the class was just like, okay, like
I found you.
Like it was like kind of has like this weird like stalky feeling.
Yeah.
Like okay, you're genetically stalking me and my family. like okay, like this is weird. Like, and they're like, okay, well, yeah, nice to meet you, cuz, you know. And I was like kind of just standing there. I was like, this is very interesting. Like, you know, and I was like, how did this happen? He's like, oh yeah, my uncle, he's really into this stuff. And I was like, well, what's your uncle's name? And he's like, oh, it's such and such. And I was like, okay, hold on a second. I get out my phone and I go to my Ancestry app and I find his uncle. And like, I'm fourth cousins with his uncle. And I'm like, check this out. I'm fourth cousins. Is this your uncle? Because it has a picture. It's like a profile. And he's like, yeah, that's my uncle. And I'm like, yeah, I'm fourth cousins with him too. He's like, what? He's like, so what does that make us? I was like, you know.
Big family.
Yeah, we're
a whole
just
6 degrees of separation.
Yeah, exactly. Like,
Well,
just makes us a messy gene pool. That's what what it is. Like, you know.
So we could all have the Habsburg chin, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
yeah,
we're
the
really
next
committed to it.
generation. Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh gosh. So actually, it's pretty funny because I had that happen to me not that long ago too. My uncle, who is also heavily into genealogy, it must be something with uncles. Yeah, I was just thinking that. So he was showing us some of the research that he had done. And I'm like, wait a second, I think I recognize that face. And we were looking back at this older photo, and it had a much younger version of actually the guy who was working for me. His mom was in that photo, and I was like, wait a second. So I reached out to Ryan, the guy who's working for him. And I'm like, do you know this family? He's like, oh yeah, they're my like immediate grandparents. And I'm like, we're related.
Yep.
Like,
I mean, it's like,
just like enough of an offshoot where we didn't know each other, but yeah, look at that. Well, it's actually from Dansville, New York. So it's still that like Western New York feel.
Yeah, exactly. Like we don't get too far sometimes, and you know. Or not far enough, I guess. You know.
The gene pool is shallow and wide.
So
It's like a puddle more than
we say
gene puddle.
We say the hills are to keep the wind away, but really it's to keep us in.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, so Chris is our savior then, coming in from Florida to like diversify.
I don't know if that's the kind of diversity.
No, but my wife is from Alabama though. Like,
okay,
you know, so
yeah.
like, and you know, like she's and like actually we did look this up at one point. Like we're 14th cousins. Like, and I'm like, okay, I married my
Alabama.
cousin. Yeah, it's Alabama. Like, yeah,
get away
here we
from
go. Like, you know, and you're like. She's like, what does that mean? I'm like, well, you know, it means like, you know, 14 generations ago we had a common ancestor, but like, you know,
today not a whole lot.
That's like, you know, that's medieval Europe we're talking about
Yeah.
now. Like, you know, we're like, okay, and if, for that matter, like it's like, you know, kind of like what you're saying, like you just walk into the room and be like, hey, are you white? Do you speak English? Like, hey, cousin, like we're related, you know, like, you know, because it's like it's almost that statistically, you know, and if you look at like family trees, like we think of a tree as like having roots and moving upward and like spreading out, right?
Sometimes
like,
it just goes that way for a while.
you know, but at the same time, like you look, if you go back the other way, it spreads down underneath the soil the same way, and so like. We kind of have like this notion of like a pyramid that's constantly sort of fluctuating and inverting itself, right? Like the more people you're related to, like the less people you're actually related to, right? Like in other words, you stretch it out and like some of these people in your tree start to take up the same position of different ancestors. And so I mentioned, and I use this example a lot because it's kind of like a very clear example, and I can show the lineage very clearly of how Pocahontas is my 12th great grandmother, but at the same time she's my 14th great aunt. Like, and you're like, wait, how does that happen? Like, you know, like, well, you're like, well, you know, her sister ended up marrying her uncle, you know, and like, and so I'm also related to them, and so like, you know, people start to take up the same position in the tree, like, so
We're all Targaryens at heart.
Exactly right. Like that's kind of you know there's some evidence to that. I mean, people used to marry their cousins and
all the time
in Europe. Like you know,
shame.
Yeah, it's a shame. Yeah, but I don't know.
Well, I mean, I think it's really interesting that 14 generations ago, there was a common ancestor between you and your wife.
Yeah.
And don't get me wrong, the world's kind of shrinking, but does that ever make you think how many generations until my offspring will start coming back together?
Yeah, I mean that's kind of like
Hopefully one or less.
Yeah, like,
Hopefully a couple less. Did you say
Yeah.
One or less.
One or less? Okay.
yeah,
Trying to get the Habsburg gin back.
yeah. You got to keep it in the family.
Preserve the features. Yeah.
And that wasn't only the features, but it was like that was their route to power and authority.
That
like,
was.
you looked like that.
It was all about political marriages
and like keeping the wealth and the power in the family, right? Like
what better way than having cousins marrying cousins?
generational wealth. Like yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It stays close to home.
How did we make it this far as a species?
No,
Somehow.
we're just animals. Like, you know?
Yeah.
Relying on
the
the animal
day.
behavior.
So how long do you think before
The collapse of
The world
society.
ends.
yeah. Okay, sure. We'll go with that one, Steve.
I was just talking to the class the other day about Chekhov's gun. Do you know this one?
Yeah.
And so I'm like, we've made weapons of war. Like you don't make them without using them. And so like, at what point is like Putin gonna go nuts and be like, okay, I'm gonna be the first to do this in world history. I'm gonna like send a nuke on out there and see what happens. Like I'm not gonna go all of them, but
See what happens.
I want to send one out there. I want to make my name, and there's something to that effect, right? Like, like he's at the end of his sort of natural lifespan, I guess, and like,
What better way to stay in history? And stay relevant than
exactly.
committing an atrocity.
Let's send this over to Kiev and let's just see what happens, like see
I
what
won't be around for it.
see what the world does, like, or if they send one to Moscow, like, all right, at least we've decided,
I won't be around for the fallout.
this is what's going to happen, and so it's you're like, okay, when do we get to these things that we've like created for ourselves and lost control of? And it's not only that, but like, media too, right? Like you could, talk about like Chekhov's cell phone at this point, right? And you actually have like interesting things happening where people are like creating movies and writing novels and stories that are purposely sort of situated in times where there's no cell phones, right? Or that there's no sort of sense of connection between people, because like, that kind of ruins the story, right? Like, and sometimes I'll tell students a story, or I'll tell my children stories about things that happened in my past. Like, there's a great one where I hit this old lady with my car, and yeah, and it was an accident, 10 points, but because she survived.
That's not a high point value.
No, she survived.
Yes, he was docked because of that.
You didn't get to pick the money up off the ground.
No, nobody I know will ever listen to this podcast, so it doesn't matter, right? Like, they can cancel me.
Cancel culture claims
Yeah.
its next victim.
Yeah, go ahead.
On the
No,
perspective.
but yeah, so I was just taking my brother to work. I was pulling out of this parking lot onto a busy road. I was looking left, waiting for a gap in the traffic, and here comes a gap in the traffic. I gun the gas and start to turn right, and as soon as I sort of turn my head, there's an old woman in front of my car, a very, very old woman, an elderly woman. And I immediately slam on the brakes, but I knock her into the road, and she gets pretty skint up. And my brother's boss comes out. She's this woman who owns like this beach store, and she comes out, and she's like, "Oh, and I'm like, we got to call the police and an ambulance, and cars are stopping on the road, and they're like, well, did you call your mom?" Or I was like, no, like nobody had phones. Like we were like trying to figure out where the closest phone was so we could call an actual ambulance or something like that. And you're just like, yeah, like one time I broke down on the side of the road. And like, who did you call? I was like, nobody. I just started walking, I put my thumb up because like, what are you supposed to do? You didn't have like that lifeline, but she was okay for a while, that old lady. And it turned out that it was my brother's boss. It was her mother, and she had like Alzheimer's, and she'd gotten out of the house and long story short, she didn't call the police or an ambulance. She said, I'll just take care of it and you just go home. And that was the last I heard of it for about 3 months. And then I saw my friend who's, that was his mom and his grandmother. And I didn't know that at the time. And, and he's like, hey, how's it going? I'm like, all right. And he's like, so why'd you kill my grandma? And I was like, what are you talking about? I thought he was joking. I was like, what kind of stupid joke is this? Right. Like, cause he was always telling stupid jokes. And he's like, no, man, like you killed my grandma. You hit her with your car. I was like, oh, that was your grandma. I didn't know that was your grandma. Like, I didn't make the connection. And I was like, wait, she's dead? And he's like, yeah. And I was like, oh my goodness. Like, and I was starting to feel like all sort of guilty and stuff. And he's like, no, I'm just kidding. I was like, oh, good. Like, he's like, but no, for real, she is dead. He's like, you didn't kill her. She was just old, Like, I was like,
whiplash.
But I was like, yeah. Did I hasten this old woman to her grave by knocking her with my car into the road,
9 lives,
and like,
taken.
but then I also sort of added in like a little story about when I was 10 and I got hit by a car pretty badly, and I said, that's just karma at work, right?
That's karma.
That's exactly karma with a C. Yeah, like that's how it works. You get hit by a car, therefore you have a free pass at hitting someone with a car, right? Like
I'm in trouble,
right? Like that's how things equal out.
I've
right?
hit too many things with cars, and I've not gotten hit nearly as many times.
It's coming.
Build up.
It's coming.